Hello and welcome back to Bastionland Broadcasting, where tonight I'm going to be looking through a role-playing game that I haven't really talked about much on stream so far, and I've not, we've been focusing on Electric Bastionland in the past, and we've been dipping into Grimlight to do some miniature gaming in the last few weeks. But there's a game that I'd been working on for a little while before that, which is a very straightforward concept if you're familiar with two of the games. I'm not going to just recount I wrote a couple of blog posts about this, so I'm not going to repeat myself from there, but basically I was a big fan of the atmosphere of Mothership role-playing game by Tuesday Night Games, Sean McCoy and Alan Girding. And I liked a lot of that game, but I kept sort of thinking, I really like this. I feel there's a lot to learn from this style of game. And I was also, at the time, I'd been dipping into Blades in the Dark, and I enjoyed it a lot when I played it, but I thought there's a few too many moving parts for my particular tastes. I feel like there's an opportunity here to trim things down quite a lot. So if you imagine a trimmed down Blades in the Dark, which if you haven't played it is like a heist based game, and the space atmosphere of Mothership, well, I'm not going to pretend this game is anything other than basically mashing these two ideas together. So I'm also revealing that I've been tinkering away on the layout for this. This is by no means anything close to what I would like to do if I do decide to make this into a release. But I've been experimenting with the layout a bit, and thrown together a very gaudy cover here. But what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through this game. It's 36 pages, A5. I would like to just show sort of where I'm at with it at the moment, highlight some of the things that I've taken from each of those two games, and just look at the design of it. And we're also going to roll up a set of characters. So we're going to roll up 3 characters for our sort of imaginary starting group. So Voidheist, I like to start things with a 3 lines of text. In deep space, an opportunity for a big score. Terrible things lurk in your way. So, as you can see, I'm trying to mash up the ideas of like a heist with some horror elements. I haven't gone too deep on the horror side of things yet because I want to get the heist running smoothly, and then perhaps there's a bit more room for putting horror stuff in there as well. So, the layout, and to tell you what, let's go full screen. Let's treat ourselves. It's been a while since we did a big PDF read through. So the layout, like I say, at the moment is very much me tinkering around with the layout software, and it's meant to look like a kind of abstract representation of like a monitor, like a display monitor with like stuff sticking out, a little bit kind of retro futurism kind of thing going on. It may not look anything like this if I ever actually get to do anything with this game. But as with Into the Odd and Electric Bastionland, I wanted to present a game and the world through the lens of the characters. I think that's worked really well for me in the past, and it's something I wanted to stick with here. And as such, you're thrown straight into the character creation system. So your character is going to be defined by an origin, which is where they are from, and an occupation, which is what did you do. And the where you are from is going to give you a lot of the kind of world building. It's kind of like, it's not a specific place, but it's like one of the 6 factions, if you like, of the world. And by world, I obviously mean it's in space. So the galaxy, or the sector that Voidheist is set in. If you've played Blades in the Dark, the way that it works will be very familiar. The core mechanic is kind of the same in that you're rolling dice based on how many points you have in a certain skill. And you're trying to get, you roll a number of dice and you choose the single highest die. And they're all D6s, I should say. Every single roll is D6. So you take the highest D6 from your roll. If you get a 6, things work really well. If you get a 4 or 5, things work, but there's a bit of a catch to it. So there's nothing radical in that regard. And if you get 1 to 3, things go really bad. So we'll get onto the mechanics afterwards, because if we're imagining that we're the player reading this, we don't know about the mechanics yet, and you don't really need to. The main things that you need to know are listed here. So you have skills and you have points in your skills. And it's going to come from your origin and your occupation. So let's do a little roll, shall we? So we're going to roll for an origin and an occupation. So our origin is number 3 and our occupation is number 2. So we are going to be, our origin is naval and our occupation is researcher. So our first character is a naval researcher. You know what, let's do all 3 and then we'll kind of go back and do them, fill in the blanks as we go. So we've got a naval researcher. Doesn't matter if you get duplicates really. 1 and 4, we have a corporate engineer. And finally, we have 5 and 6. So no duplicates, which is, it's good for the purposes of demonstration. An android pioneer. And the idea is, like I say, giving you these little quite broad classes like engineer or researcher. It's not like the failed careers of Electric Bastion and where things are very specific and sort of highly flavored. They're quite broad because I feel like with this setting is meant to be a bit more of a not quite generic, but like a more typical sci-fi setting than Electric Bastion Land is in relation to anything else. So with Electric Bastion Land, I wanted to be specific because it's quite a weird place, and you've got to sort of it helps to give people something to latch onto to understand the world, because it's a bit different from your sort of typical fantasy world. This is a little bit more like your standard sci-fi world. So if I say that you are an android pioneer, without me telling you anything else, you've probably got a little bit of some ideas coming through for what that means for the character. Now, I said that your origin and your occupation are going to give you some skills. So naval, the naval origin gives you hardware and weaponry. So you put down hardware, and I'm going to put a point in that, and a weaponry. 1 point in that. Then your occupation is going to give you a second pair of skills. So researcher gives you authority. And science. So at the moment we have 4 skills and we have 1 point in each of them. So you get 1 point in all the skills from your origin and occupation, and then you get 2 points that you can put anywhere. So you could put them in 2 skills that you don't already have. For the sake of simplicity and because it's generally a good idea, I'm going to put them into something we've already got skill in. So naval researcher, I'm thinking it might be good to, I'm thinking authority and weaponry. So we're kind of leaning into the naval side of things, I think. Weaponry and authority. So authority is when you're speaking and leading in confidence. So if you're trying to say, I should have said, the whole point of this is we're going to be doing a heist in space. So if you're trying to sort of get somebody to believe that you're in charge and you're trying to speak with authority, or you're just trying to outright intimidate someone, that's going to come from authority. And weaponry is obviously firing and maintaining weapons. So we'll leave that as it is. Now you will get you'll get 2 more things. Well, I lie. You'll get 3 more things, but we'll come back to that. We're going to sort of jump between our 3 characters and see if we can build them each one step at a time. Corporate engineer. So corporate gives us authority and secrecy. And engineer gives us athletics and hardware. So for this one, I think we're going to lean into the, I feel like hardware is kind of a useful one to have on a heist. So I'm going to put the extra 2 points all into hardware. This person is like the engineer. That's their main thing. Now, Android Pioneer. So Android gives us hardware and software. I will fix that. And Pioneer gives us science and weaponry. So weirdly, we've had like, I'll explain in a second what I mean. You can get like crossover. So let's say that we'd rolled a naval soldier. You can see that you get weaponry for both the naval background and the soldier background. So you could end up with like a character that comes out of the bag quite kind of specialized. But so far, all 3 that we've rolled have been quite a nice widespread, so that we can choose where to go with this. So we've got someone who's decent with weapons and authoritative. I think this android, we're going to lean into the science and software side of things. So we've already got one other person with science. I feel like let's do 1 software and 1 science. So there we go. That's our skills. So if our corporate engineer here, if they are doing anything relating to hardware, so hardware is tools and machinery, whereas software is terminals and AI. So, you know, I'm sure I don't need to explain the difference between hardware and software to everyone, but it's an important distinction here. If our corporate engineer was trying to rig a door so that it's going to close after a certain amount of time, let's say they're messing with the hardware of the security door so that it's going to like burn through a fuse, and when that fuse burns through, it's going to like trigger the lock, and it's going to isolate maybe the characters away from all the guards. They would roll 3 dice because they've got 3 points, and they take the highest. So this is a 6, which means it's a success without any sort of consequences. So that's the bare bones of our characters. But what they also get, I mean, they get some standard gear. So they all get a hand tool that could be used as a weapon. They get customized overalls or uniform, and I would encourage suggesting, actually defining what that is. I just love the patches and trinkets rolls from Mothership, and it took all of my self-control not to just like completely steal that, but I would just tell, it's almost like an official rule here that I would suggest people buy Mothership and use those tables for this, because it's great, and I don't want to just make like a lesser version of that table that already exists. But yeah, if you want to choose how your overalls or uniform are customized, and you get a sturdy handheld device, which is something I really like. So I imagine like an old satellite phone, like a big chunky rubberized like phone. It has low res video and voice, just like we're experiencing tonight. Plug-in data transfer, alarm and timer, scientific calculator, voice and text modes, and noughts and crosses. So some incredible features on this device. Now, I kind of had to specify this. Bear with me. Just try not to choke. Don't mind me. I had to specialize this this device because one of the problems you have with sci-fi games and any game set in like the modern era forward, by modern, sorry, I mean today, so like the contemporary era or forward, The problem you've got is mobile phones are obviously amazing, and everyone has a device that can do amazing things. So it kind of makes sense now that even if we're talking like, well, especially if we're talking near future, if you were setting a game in 2040, I would expect my sort of handheld device to be able to do incredible things. And I wanted to lean into the retro thing, partly because it's kind of like fun in itself, but partly because it means you have to be a bit more creative because you've got more limited options. You haven't got like the equivalent of a smartphone. You've got something that's more like an old brick phone with a calculator and noughts and crosses. And I tried to sort of specify that here. What I'd really like to do is have like a little a page that looks like a user manual for your device with like these are like pointing to bits of the image saying like what the different features are. That would be cool, and it would really like highlight exactly how crappy this device is. Anyway, on top of this, you've got gauges. So each character has a gauge for stress and hurt, and then they also have gauges for heat, prep, and print. We will get to that when we talk about mechanics. So yeah, that's it. And you know, there's little bits of background here. They're kind of repeated a little bit later on, so I won't go into them now. But I wanted to have, in Mothership, you've got things like Teamster, I can't remember if it's scientist or researcher. I think it's scientist. You've got Teamster, scientist, marine, and android are the four classes. And what I loved about that is they're all very evocative. Like, it's not just fighter or even soldier, it's marine, which tells you something. And, you know, the Teamster, it tells you something about the sort of world that they're inhabiting, that's what they're called. And I wanted to latch onto that, but I wanted to sort of expand it into the world as well. So as well as having these quite archetypal but evocative classes, you've also got these factions. So like the fact that you can be a corporate soldier or a colonial soldier or a naval soldier, it all means three very different things. So a corporate soldier, well, I'll tell you what, let's look at the actual combinations that we've got. So in addition to the gear that we've got here, every combination of origin and occupation has a unique piece of gear that they get. So who did we have? We had a naval researcher. To find their unique gear, we go to the naval page. And here we get a little bit of information about what it means to be naval. You were born and raised on a fleet that holds no permanent allegiance besides itself. And that's all that you've got about what it means to be a part of the navies. I'm not going to give you a timeline. I'm not going to draw a map of what territory is naval and what is colonial and what is corporate. You've got to work it out from looking at this, basically. So, naval, what were we? Naval researcher. So, your unique piece of equipment is a stim gun. So, each dose lasts for one action and causes one stress when it wears off. You can cause surge, which gives +2 to athletics. Calm, temporarily ignore all stress and trauma, but you can't speak. And recall, you have perfect memory recall. So you've got like three little one-use well, it's not really specified actually how many uses. That's something I need to put in there. But I think it's intended to be one dose of each that you can use throughout the mission. And that's unique, like nobody else can get that. So let's put that in. I'm not going to write in the whole description because we can see what it is. So stim gun with surge, calm, and recall. So there we go. And it's a little bit of world building because it tells you something about the fact that if you're a researcher in the sort of naval faction, you might be focused on like creating these stims. So it tells you something about maybe the navies are using these chemicals to alter their, their soldiers. Interesting. In addition, you get a random thing, which is a type of roll that I've never seen before or since, and it basically only really exists because I wanted to keep on using D6s, but I didn't want to do D66, so I didn't have room. But I also didn't want to do 2d6 because 2d6 is a bit too weighted towards the middle. So doing d6 times d6, it gives you, I think, like 18 results, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I can't count. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Yeah, it gives you 18 different results. And some are more common than others, but it's not a curve. It's like a weird spiky distribution line. But yeah, if you want to use D6s and you want to have 18 results on your table and you don't really care about some being more frequent than others, there you go. D6 times D6, you can use that. So 3 times 4 is 12, which is one of the more common results, as you might expect. So we've also got a Cyber Canary. Now, because this game is drawing a lot from Blades in the Dark, there's a lot of emphasis in Blades in the Dark on, I'm not sure if this is what John Harper would call it exactly, but like fiction first, I believe is what I've seen it called elsewhere. And basically like follow the fiction of the game and use, the rules kind of come secondary to that. And I think that's actually something that I, without necessarily calling it that, that's something that I would do a lot myself anyway. So for things like this Cyber Canary, we don't need to give it stats. Because of the way the game works, it's not as focused on like HP and damage scores and things like that as Into the Odd and Electric Bastion and are. So the Cyber Canary is kind of like a narrative device that we can use when appropriate, but we don't really need to worry about stats for it. We'll sort of use the mechanics as needed. A lot of that comes down to the guidance in the game book, and there's not really much in there at the minute because it's basically written for me to use. Blades in the Dark has a lot of guidance for how to use its systems, which is, even if you're not interested in that kind of game, I'd say it's worth a read because there's a lot of interesting guidance in there. There's a lot of stuff that I really like, and it's something I'd really like to see games do more, where you really dig into each system and talk about here's how you use it. And it's not just about providing, it's a big thick book and it does have quite a lot of rules, but it's also got like a lot of just guidance for how to actually run the game. So our Naval Researcher is almost done. Now, two things that I missed. I'll come back to Instinct. Naming trick. So there's a little trick for each faction for how to name their characters, because it's very tricky to come up with a name when you've got like a blank slate in front of you. If it's like come up with a name, my brain just like gives up. But instead we've got 2 things to choose from for the forename and 2 things for the surname. So if you are in the chat and you want to help me out, that would be great. For our forename, we either need an affectionate nickname or an insulting nickname. And then for the surname, we need either a body part descriptor, so examples are Shorehand and Firehead, or a dress descriptor like red sash or cloaker. So basically a nickname for their first name, and then their surname is a description of either their body or their manner of dress. There's a challenge for someone in the chat. While you are mulling that over, I'm going to talk about the Instinct section. I'm gonna hide myself because I'm blocking an important bit there. But the Instinct section that you can see there, just on the left of the page. Instinct is what happens when your stress gauge gets filled up. So I said that your character has a stress gauge and a hurt gauge. Hurt is exactly what it sounds like. It's the closest thing you've got to HP. You're going to take hurt, the gauge is going to fill up, and when it reaches the top, it's going to get you're going to be looking at injuries or potentially being at risk of death. Stress, when that gets filled up, I'll go into the details when we get to it in the book, but basically when you reach your stress limit, your instinct kicks in, and the instinct is based on your faction. So for the naval faction, the instinct is one of those words that no matter how many times I write it, it just looks wrong. Hostility, which means I need to get my commas in the right place. Instinct is hostility, which means all danger rolls other than attacks are skill 0. No, that's ruined my lovely sheet. So basically, when you've reached your stress level as a naval character, if you try and do anything other than attack, you're going to be operating as if you don't have any skill points. So let's say we had given this guy like a load of science points. When he reached his stress limit, then the science is going to be counting as 0 unless he's using it to attack. So it's the closest I've ever put in a game to like a kind of sanity system, in the point where you reach this break where you sort of lose control of your character a bit. But I don't want to have it be that you are forced to do something. So I didn't want to have like a case where you reach your stress limit and then it says, oh right, so you attack the nearest player character, you go mad and you just shoot them with your gun. Instead, I wanted to like guide the player in that direction and just hinder them if they try to go against their instinct. So as a naval character, your instinct is to like fight things, really. And when you reach you can normally put that instinct aside, but when you reach high levels of stress, that's going to be like your focus. So if you imagine an entire squad of naval characters, if they all reach their stress limit, you're just going to want to go loud, basically, and go in all guns blazing. Let's see, we've got some names coming up. Corgi Fan says Nails Epaulette. Costo Biolith says a Cutter Red Sash. Judith Priest said Nails Headband. We're going to go with the first one. We're going to go with Nails Epaulette. I kind of just like Nails. I think that's just like a fun name. So we're not going to even bother with the surname, because I think it's tough enough to remember a character's remember one name, let alone a forename and a surname. So there we go. Nails is complete. So Nails has good authority and weaponry skills with a bit of hardware and science on the side. They have a stim gun that they can use to dose up friends and allies or enemies if need be. They have a cyber canary, and their instinct is to go hostile. Done. Right, so I can speed through the two a little bit more quickly now that we've done that. So corporate engineer. Now, I tried really hard to not just make to not make any one faction more evil than the others, and it's difficult because, without getting too political, if you imagine any sci-fi setting where there is a corporation, they are almost always bad. So it was hard to have corporate in there and for it to be like not just like the evil faction. But I've tried to make each of them a little bit sketchy in their own way. But corporate were the trickiest to do that. So you are part of the corporate machine on or around Earth, where influence is everything. So their instinct, to contrast what we have with the naval character, is paranoia, which means any danger rolls that they make with allies present count as skill 0. So when you get stressed out as a corporate character, you want to get away from your allies because you don't trust them anymore. You want to just do it for yourself because, the corporate world was so focused on like individuality that you just can't be around people. When things get stressful, you just want to send your allies off somewhere else and get on with it yourself. So we'll put that in. Instinct. Paranoia. There we go. Let's just space these out a bit. So what does the corporate engineer get that's special? Oh well, tell you what, let's do the name thing first, so you lot can be thinking about this. Let's hide myself again. Oh no. 4 names. I like this one better actually. 2 letters spelt phonetically, such as AB or YR, or a fancy colour, ochre or sepia. And for the surname, a city behind a surname prefix, so Van Paris or Olahor, or the compound of a positive adjective and noun, bright path, clear bar. So there we go. Have fun with that and see what you can come up with. Meanwhile, we are a corporate engineer, I think. I can't seem to remember anything tonight, even for lost my short-term memory. Oh, tool printer. So, I mentioned that one of your gauges that you have as a group is the print gauge. And this kind of slightly it doesn't have a direct equivalent in Blades in the Dark, but it's kind of linked to the whole preparation process. So in Blades in the Dark, you have some time before going onto the heist to do like some prep, and that's still in this game. But there's also printing, where you have essentially a 3D printer that will print something made out of some kind of temporary material. So you can make quite complex things, but they're going to kind of crumble to dust after the mission. It's a bit of a gamey thing, so you can't just keep printing everything you need. But I've always said about the setting serving the game. So there we go. That's why it works like that. So you have a printer that you have as a group, and you have a gauge that will eventually run out. So you have a limited amount of stuff that you can print as a group for your mission. However, if you're the corporate engineer, you have your own printer, and it can only print tools. So again, it's leaning into this whole individuality element of corporate life. You also have a snitch chip. It alerts you when somebody nearby is breaking protocol. This is this kind of thing, as a GM, you might look at that and look at it with a bit of horror, because you're thinking, that's very vague. There are a lot of vagaries in here. It's a bit like oddities in Electric Bastion, where they're left a little bit open, and I would always encourage discussing with your players, like, look, what exactly does this mean? Just to make sure you're all on the same page. But yeah, you have a snitch chip. So that's useful if you're trying to if you're trying to infiltrate somewhere, that might sort of tip you off that somebody's already breaking the rules somewhere. So you can sort of maybe use that as a way to get in. Corgi Fan suggests Cyan O'Wellington. It's pretty good. I like it. We're just gonna go with Cyan for now, but I do like O'Wellington. And oh, let's not forget their random thing. So D6 times D6. 2 and 5. Buzz pills. No, I do not explain what buzz pills are. That is for you to work out. So there's our corporate engineer. Mainly focused on hardware. They've got a tool printer, snitch chip, and buzz pills. And when they reach their stress limit, they're going to want to get their allies to get lost and go and do something on their own. Finally, our android pioneer. So there are 2 kind of non-human origins in this game. There's the android and there's the genos, who are like your genetically engineered organisms. Now, if you weren't already sick of me ripping off Red Dwarf, this was kind of very much inspired by that, because you got, I'm trying to concentrate, but Hoax Fish has just dropped an incredible pun in the chat, and it's really messing with my concentration. I'm not going to repeat it live on air, but it is excellent. So androids are the only androids are one of the only 2 types of non-human life in this setting that are there as sort of confirmed, and the other ones are genos, which are genetically engineered. No, they're not. genetically engineered organisms, which is very similar to the genetically engineered life forms in Red Dwarf in many ways, in concept, if not in final execution. And I like that idea. I like the kind of no aliens thing. There's only like weird things that humanity has created, confirmed anyway. And then, of course, there are aliens out there, but I'm not going to present you with too many sort of canonical aliens. Anyway, androids. So, our android character here, their instinct, which is going to be quite different to the corporate and the navy backgrounds. Their background is obsession. Their instinct is obsession. Now, this is one that I really relate to. I'm not sure if any of you watching relate to the hostility more. So when you reach your stress limit, do you become more hostile? Do you become more paranoid, or do you get more obsessed with something? And this is the one that I felt attacked by, even though I wrote it. So the GM puts a question in your head. Until resolved, roles unrelated to finding the answer are skill 0. So let's say this puts a lot on the GM, and it's going to rely a lot on like GM guidance. The key here is that as the GM is coming up with a really fun question to put in it, because you don't want to put a question in like, I don't know, what would it feel like if I went into the sun? No. As a GM, you want to choose something that's like related to the current mission and something that you could investigate and it wouldn't cause too much trouble, but it's not, you don't want the obsession to be how can we find the thing that we're looking for, because you're already going to be doing that. So I would put it as something like, did that guard really believe I was human? So say you've snuck through, but you just barely snuck through. So if you rolled like a partial success, you might have got past the guard pretending to be a human. But then when you reach your stress limit, the GM might say, well, the question in your head is, did that guard really believe I was human? And then anything that you do that isn't related to finding that out, it's like you've got that nagging thing in your head and you can't stop thinking about it. They get very fixated on something. And like I say, this is a little bit too close to home for me. It's one of the nastier ones, but you're an android, so you should be kind of difficult for a human player to deal with, frankly. So Android Pioneer, what do we get? Oh no, let's do that. Let's do the name first. So our name, your forename is going to be either a nature noun like leaf or river, or an extended phonetic version of a letter, Beeb, SO, or Ellie. So like SO is S, the letter S, with an extra little syllable in the end. Surname could be 2 numbers, or it could be an old computer function or part. So write, valve, you know. There you go. Get to work on that, and we'll see what we come up with. So we're an Android Pioneer, right? Oh, that's right. I remember this one now. So you get future materials, which is total protection from extremes of heat, corrosive chemicals, and EMP radiation. So you're kind of like indestructible from like environmental things. Because obviously you're an Android Pioneer. You were probably sent out to all sorts of terrible worlds. Eternal cells, which meaning you can consume minerals to charge your power. So you're kind of like super survivable, basically. You're just like really hardy, and you're not going to get in a position where you're running out of power, or you know the conditions are too extreme for you. So yeah, that's it. And our random thing is our D6 times D6. 12. I keep getting 12. alcoholic waste liquid. Wow. So this guy, well, this robot is literally eating rocks and pissing whiskey. So I can see why they might keep this one around. Do we have a name for our Android Pioneer yet? Let's think. I like the nature noun thing. Like, I just like the juxtaposition of like an android called... So we've used leaf and river. Tadpole shutter, it says Corgi fan. I kind of like shutter out of that. That's a nice memorable name for me. We've got nails, cyan, and shutter. So I believe that is all 3 of our characters done. So let's just quickly remind ourselves here. So these 3 will be going into their heist as a team, despite coming from different backgrounds. Whatever the reason, whatever your background, you've all decided to come together to do a dangerous job to steal something. Now, I'm going to briefly look at like the other factions that we didn't touch on, just because they're quite fun. So colonial, if you're a colonial character, these are like independent colonies that are outside of corporate influence. There's a focus on like unity here. So it's like they're kind of the opposite to the corporates, because corporate's all about yourself. Colonials, their instinct is dependency. So when you hit your stress limit, you need people around you, otherwise you're going to be at skill 0. So like the nightmare scenario is when you have a colonial character and a corporate character both hitting their stress limit. The colonial character wants to stay together because that's their instinct, and the corporate character wants to split up. So you get some fun little clashes there. Their random things are much more like you'd expect to see in like a more of a communal society. So like ceremonial beads, decorative scars, things that feel a bit more like tarot deck, like things that you can't use on your own. They're things that are related to like a group, whereas the corporate things are much more like I want colour changing hair for myself, or I want I want crocodile boots. I don't know why that's in there. E-smokes. It's all about me. Naval ones, like I say, they're quite straightforward in their theme. The Union is this logo a little bit too on the nose. Someone mentioned about these icons. I spent far too long on these icons because I wanted them to say something about the faction. Like, again, the colonial one, I don't know. It's a bit too... It's not quite right for what I mean here. It works, but it's not quite right. Union is like a bit too much like this is just almost the UN logo and the color as well. So this might change at some point, but yeah, it's not a bad thing because it's very easy to just say, yeah, you're the space UN, and people kind of get it. These are all from game icons. I don't know if it's .com or something, but if you just search for like game icons, there's a load of free game icons you can use. And yeah, this is, if you've read Electric Bastion, you know that I love a bit of making fun of bureaucracy, and there's a lot of that in here. But they're also kind of like, they've got all the big tech, but you're also quite tied up. So your instinct is control. So list a 3 action plan. Any rolls outside the plan are skill 0. So when you reach your stress limit, you've got to like say, right, this is what we're doing. And then if the situation changes, you start to mess up because you were so focused on the plan. And again, I feel a little bit attacked by that. And their random things are all like kind of super high tech in many ways, but also kind of useless. Coffee printer, finger marker, unhelpful hollow doctor is a particular favorite. The android. Oh, we didn't do a... Oh, no, we did. The random things are all like, as you would expect, like extra little bits of your body. And finally, the genos. Their instinct is isolation. So any actions in the view of a non-ally are skilled 0. So it's a little bit... It's a subtle difference to the corporate one. So the corporate instinct for paranoia. They want to get away from their allies. For the Genos, they want to, like, they can be around people that they know they're safe around, but they don't want to be seen by anyone else. So Genos are kind of very secretive. The legality of your existence is a grey area, but you're better off keeping a low profile. So they're kind of like slightly mistrusting of people, perhaps. And yeah, you get some all sorts of weird things like splicing kits, a savant gene, a predator gland, and the random thing is usually like something that slightly gives you away that you're not quite a typical human. Technoscale says union carries a different connotation to me. Yeah, union could in some ways, if it's like a workers' union, is probably closer to like the colonial one. I think I did have like I've been through so many names. They're almost certain to change again, so don't get too like attached to any of these. But yeah, union. UN is like the first two letters, so it gives you something right away. So that is the world of Voidheist presented through the characters. I'm not going to sit and go through like the entire mechanics of the game. Like I said before, it's very similar to Blades in the Dark, a very stripped down version of Blades in the Dark, where you're rolling a d6 for each of the scores that you've got. No, a d6 for each point you've got in the skill that you're using. The skills are quite broad, so hardware is anything to do with like tools or machinery. I didn't want to have a skill in there for like, I don't know, zero gravity engineering, because that's quite specific. I wanted to go quite broad, and it's a shame because in Mothership there's some really specific skills, and I think it helps set the scene of the world. And it really nails down like a specific feel for your character, but I wanted these 8 skills to be things that you could try and use on most heists. So if you're the science character and you've got like 4 points in science, you can usually find a way to use that at least once. Whereas if you're like the botany character, it's a lot harder in certain scenarios to find a way to use that. Complications are what happens when you roll a 4 or 5. Let me hide myself a little bit so you can see. So when you roll, you take the highest die. You either fail, which means you get a complication and you fail. A mess means you do it, but there's a complication. Pass means you just do it and it's great. The complications here are pinched from all sorts of sources. Apocalypse World, Blades in the Dark, various blog posts. Just things you can do to make people's life more complicated, especially on a heist. So like leaving a loose thread, make things, put them in a worse position, expose a secret, force a tough choice, deplete power or ammo. So this is why like I don't want, in this kind of game, I wouldn't have like ammo tracking, but it might be that you run out of ammo as a result of a certain complication. So if you say like you're firing your machine gun at these aliens that are coming at you and you roll a 4 or 5, I might say, okay, fine, you kill the alien, but you notice you've only got 1 bullet left in your gun now. Or you could say you do that, but now the power on your shields or whatever is going down. So it's very kind of narrative focused, which I think fits the kind of heist format, because you want the heist to be like messy and dramatic. I think if it goes very cleanly, it can be satisfying, but I wanted it to be like there's always a bit of like the pressure's building up and things are going wrong. So that's where the gauges come in. The gauges are very similar to clocks in Blades in the Dark. For various like, mostly like just logistical reasons, I prefer to have a gauge going up rather than a clock going down. They go from 1 to 6, which means you can use a d6. So I would just have on your character sheet, you'd have a gauge for hurt. And they all start at 1. So you start by just having like a die in each of the gauges showing 1. And when it goes up, it'll go up by 1 point for a minor effect, 2 points for a standard effect, 3 points for a major effect. And if in doubt, use 2. So use standard. So you get hit across the back of the head by a crowbar, I'd say that's standard, you're going to take 2 hurt. And when the gauge reaches certain points, you're going to suffer consequences. So when it reaches 4, you're going to suffer major consequences with a mechanical effect. When it reaches 6, you're going to reach critical consequences. And it goes into that for the specific gauges as you go on. And these are all called danger rolls. So you only roll when there's actual danger. And that sounds like, by this point, I think a lot of us will be thinking that's really obvious. Like, we all learned this years ago. But you'd be surprised how often people feel like if they're not getting the players to roll, they're not running the game properly. And sometimes you don't need to roll. Like, it can be fun to roll, but a lot of time you don't need to. And especially if they're not doing anything dangerous yet, you want to use those rolls when they start taking risks. Because otherwise what's going to happen is they're going to fail the roll for doing something really mundane. And you're going to have to create this weird situation where it's like, oh, so you're climbing this ladder and you fail, so you slip and you hurt your arm. And it's a bit like non-dramatic. So I would just go through it. Technoscala says death and damage are often the boring option. That's true. We'll look at that when we get to hurt, because there's kind of a link there, which I'll talk about. I've got a few questions. I'm just catching up on the chat. Walter Lichinio. Maybe Union for Colonies and Council for Union. I think I did have Council as the name for Union, and I changed it because I used the word Council so much in Electric Bastion Land, and I didn't want it to just be like getting confused with that. But to be honest, the games are so different. I don't think anyone's gonna. This is almost unrelated to anything I've done with Electric Bastion Land, really. So that might be something that goes back. You never know. But yeah. So here is what happens. So let's look at stress. So as standard, you're going to take 2 stress from like a grim situation. And it's usually going to come from a result of failing, or having a mess result or a fail result on your roll to do something. Consequences are, when your stress gauge reaches 4 or 5, nearby allies that do not share your occupational origin take 1 stress, and this can cause a chain reaction. So if we look at our group, remember when I said it was great that we had no crossover? So we've got a naval researcher, corporate engineer, android pioneer. Nobody shares an origin, and nobody shares an occupation. It's great for having like a broad set of characters, but it's bad because our characters can't relate to each other that well. So when they start getting stressed, they're going to stress each other out a bit. And that's kind of lifted almost directly from Mothership. The implementation is very different, but I definitely got the idea from Mothership. And that's why it's quite nice to have like connections in your group. So if you've got like maybe 2 naval characters or 2 researchers from different origins, putting them together, they're less likely to freak each other out when things start going bad. And yeah, like I said, when it gets full, your instinct kicks in. So as well as your stress and hurt for yourself, you also have some gauges for the entire operation. And heat is one that is pretty clearly lifted from Blades in the Dark. It's how much attention has your operation drawn to itself. So this is one that's very common when you get like a messy situation. So let's say you're trying to like hack into a computer to open a door. If you get a mess, I might say that, okay, you do it, but someone on the other end of the computer terminal has caught on. So you're going to take 2 heat to your heat gauge. And your heat gauge, when it gets to 4, sounds the alarm basically. So they know you're here, but they don't know exactly what you're doing. So they know something's up, but they don't know all the details. When the gauge reaches 6, code red, they know exactly what you're doing and exactly where you are. And the thing that I should have said about gauges is you can get them to go down, and it's all about following the fiction. So if you do something that lowers the heat, like tying up a loose end, laying low, I would be happy to turn down the heat gauge. So it does go both ways. hydration complete. And then we'll talk a little bit about interesting consequences. Technoscal mentioned about how death can be like the least interesting option. That is true. There are definitely situations where it makes sense that it would be the hurt gauge that goes up. But as you can see, my standard now, and it's what I use in Electric Bastion and really with critical damage. It's much more likely that you're just going to be dying. So you get one chance to save yourself or be saved. So you're not going to get like shot by a gun and you're dead. You're going to get shot and you're bleeding out, and it creates like a crisis situation. And I always find that so much more interesting than like just dying outright. You've also got gauges for prep and print, like I said, so you can print various things ahead of time. You can use prep as a kind of doing things like doing reconnaissance or making social connections or doing little sort of side jobs ahead of the main job. The one thing that isn't here, you'll notice from Blades of the Dark, is the flashback mechanic, and lots of people hate that mechanic for reasons that I don't really agree with. They think it kind of ruins problem solving and preparation. I don't think it does. I think because you can't just use it, you can't just keep flashing back and saying like, oh, I flash back and I remember to pack the exact thing that we need right now. Like in Blades in the Dark, it still uses up resources to do that, so you're still incentivized to plan. But I felt with the printing and the prep, they had enough sort of ways to be flexible. And remember, printing, you can always go back and print, like you don't when you're in the job. Technoscal says, I noticed no engagement roll or crew sheet mechanic like Blades in the Dark. No, the crew sheet I haven't really used. The closest you've got to the crew sheet is like the prep and print gauges. Advancement at the moment is like the least of my worries, because I want to get the main game working. So there is a little bit of advancement, but nowhere near the whole sort of sub game of like gang management that that Blades in the Dark has. But that's not really a focus at the minute. Engagement roll, as with so many systems, the exercise here was for me to go in with an axe and chop off bits of Blades in the Dark that I felt weren't needed. And in isolation, the engagement roll is a very simple mechanic. It basically determines your starting point at the start of the heist. So do you start things off in a very comfortable position, or do you start things off like on the back foot already from the beginning? And I just felt it was a little bit, I didn't need it. Like I felt like by removing it, I wasn't losing anything. And it's very light, so you might think, well, why don't you just include it, because it's not adding much to it. But my goal has always been to stay at that extreme end of like simple rules. And while this game isn't like as ultra simple as something like Into the Odd, because there are a few more moving parts, I wanted to stay at that extreme end. And then if you played Blades in the Dark and you've played this game and you think, oh, I'm going to put the engagement roll back in, it's easy enough to do. But a new player isn't going to look at that engagement roll and decide to chop it off. So I really wanted to get it down to the absolute skeleton here. Weapons are very broad, and that's kind of it really. You've got a little bit of detail on your ship, and then guidance for jobs. So the kind of things you're going to be doing might be stealing data, doing an assassination, stealing goods, finding evidence of something. And then the structure, I find this really useful because I'm so used to running like dungeon crawls and stuff. I hadn't really run a heist game before, so I do use this as a kind of checklist. So like you have the briefing where you're going to find out what the job is. You've got some preparation time. You've got the entry where you've got to try and get into wherever the thing that you need is. The execution, which is actually getting it, getting out, and then delivering it or providing proof that you've done it. And then there's a little bit of world building here. Talking about the different factions of the universe. This is almost, oh look at that, there's error there. I didn't underline the I. This is almost identical to a section in Electric Bastion Land, where you got the dilemma, or make it happen, or do a roll, or it's impossible. So again, kind of in there for me. A little bit of explanation of like how to use which skill at the right time. So, you know, authority and empathy are like the two social skills, really. They're the two skills that are based around talking with people. So it's useful to know, well, when am I using authority, when am I using empathy? And it might be that the player has a choice. So if you're talking to someone and you've got 3 points in empathy and no points in authority, you might say, well, can I use empathy? And it might mean that the outcome is slightly different, whether you succeed or fail, depending on the approach that you're using. And I would always encourage players to just say what they're doing. But in this game, I do allow a little bit of kind of discussion as to like, well, what skill am I using? Because I don't want the players to say something like, let's say the character had a high empathy score. I wouldn't want them to say something where they thought, oh, I'm leaning into my empathy here because that's my speciality. And then as a GM, I say, okay, roll secrecy. And they're like, well, why? So I'd be a little bit more transparent about the mechanics here than I would be in something like Electric Bastion, because in that game, it's pretty clear when you're using strength or charisma or dexterity. And yeah, this just kind of tries to tackle some of the common, imagined common misconceptions there. A little bit of a guide on obstacles. They're all very narrative and abstract, really. Like, they don't have lots of stats. They're just kind of a narrative device. Heartbreaker75 asks, have you tried playing with prep as flashbacks? I think it comes from the Leverage RPG originally. You know what? I did, actually. I originally had the flashbacks in there, and you could use prep. Exactly what you've just suggested. So you could save prep, and you could use it to sort of retroactively say, well, we'll actually go back and do that. But I did find that groups were saving it a little bit too much, and they weren't doing enough prep ahead of time, so it felt a bit like they were going in blind. And it was, you know, the flashback thing is fun. I think it could work, but if I was going to do it again, I'd want it almost to be its own gauge. So it's not like, oh, well, I say that. I think one of the characters, I think one of the characters did have, so I thought it was this precog node. I wonder if one of the characters had something that was like, it basically lets you do that, lets you do a flashback. I can't remember. But yeah, I'm not saying never, but for me, I took it out and I ran a couple of games and I didn't notice like missing it. Whereas when it was there, I felt like it was sometimes causing a little bit of confusion. But if I was going to put it back in, I'll make it its own gauge. I think I wouldn't have it be just prep, because I like to encourage like some prep before the job. I think that's like quite a fun section of the game. Right, where are we? We're too far away. Right, here we go. Space. Some little guidance here. I'm actually quite happy with this, and this is something I've remembered to do. I like the idea that light is never quite right. So describe the light, because you wouldn't think to describe the light necessarily if you were just in a room normally. But in space, it's always like unnatural light. So it makes sense to say like, well, it's kind of like a little bit too blue and cold, or it's slightly like flickering. The atmosphere, the air around you always has like a taste, and it's never quite right. So you might say it tastes kind of gritty air, because it's like recycled artificial air as well. And again, the gravity is never quite stable, so you might feel like little bits of floatiness just for a split second. And the travel and comms are slow unless they're experimental. Food is either cultivated in trays, sealed in pouches, or printed from code. Whatever the method, it's always off in a very specific way. So this is all designed to sort of remind you that yes, you are in space. You aren't somewhere comfortable. It's meant to create that kind of claustrophobic, because when you think about claustrophobic feeling or like isolation feeling in space, it's easy to say like, oh, well, you're in a tiny little space station. But I wanted to kind of capture that feeling of like when you're on an aeroplane and it's you are in an airplane, you are confined, so like you do get claustrophobic in that sense. But I also like, after a while, the air starts to feel stale, and you've kind of lost sense of what time of day it is, and the lights are artificial. And you know, maybe there's like a bit of a funny smell going around the cabin. And obviously food on a plane is never quite what you would expect it to be. So I wanted to get some of that feeling, so that it felt like you were in space. It felt like you weren't just, you know, the space thing isn't just like a layer of paint you slap on it. Like, it's there. You want to make it feel real. We've got some little horror tricks here. And, you know, some fluff, which I might end up deleting because it was kind of just there to get some ideas. But basically the idea was, for a system, pick any two of the factions and put them in conflict with each other. So the solar system, it's, you know, the corporations dominate the solar system, but there are resistance movements that are backed by the Union. And the rear belt, there are android communes, and they fight off raids from desperate navy fleets who refuse to recognise their right to exist. So by putting two factions in conflict, it kind of keeps the world based around these 6 big players, but you get these sort of weird combinations. This is a section that I haven't finished writing yet, because I haven't decided how I want interstellar travel to work, but I would like most games to be based around like a system, rather than like jumping between stars necessarily. And then growth. So this is, I'm going to say, entirely untested at the moment. So we can kind of ignore this section now. I'll talk about it a little bit though. So you basically, after a job, rate your success between 0 to 3 based on like getting out mostly alive, achieving an objective, or achieving multiple objectives. So if you just got out and you made it out, but you didn't achieve your objective, you're going to get 1 point. If you did something, you're going to get 2. And if you got multiple objectives, you're going to get 3. So this fills up an upgrade gauge, and when your upgrade gauge is full, you get a thing. A nice little extra here that I've forgotten about. So if you're corporate, you can choose like things like little special abilities here. There we go. So this is where that flashback thing comes in. So if you're a corporate character, you can kind of get the flashback ability as like a specialist thing. I like Shatterpoint. It's an advantage. You always know the right thing to say to set somebody off. If you are corporate and you think, oh, I like the look of these colonial upgrades, that you can start taking them, but there's a prerequisite. And they're always like a narrative thing. So you have to renounce anything you obtained from the corporation or union unless it was stolen. There we go. Or if you go and get a gene splicing, you can start taking geno upgrades. And then we've got a sample heist here, which I won't go into in too much detail, because it's kind of designed to be run by me. So it's not written in a way that's necessarily that easy for someone else to run, but you know, it gives you a starting point, and that is that. So that is Voidheist. I don't know exactly what the future of Voidheist is. As you can see, the layout is kind of getting there. I would like to look at some art if I was going to do something with it, but that's the way it is at the moment. If you are interested in Voidheist, come over to the Bastion and Discord, because I don't think it's currently, I don't know if it's currently linked on bastionand.com. I should check, because I should know that. But I don't, certainly this laid out version isn't currently available. I think there is a rough version. There is not a rough version somewhere. If you Google Voidheist, I'm sure you'll be able to find some version of it that I put out in the past. But what I will do in the next few days, I will add this to the sidebar on bastionand.com, so that at least you can start to have a look at it. Or, you know, or I might tidy it up and put it on Pay What You Want on itch.io. We'll see. But if you want to know a bit more, as always, you can go to bastionand.com, and you can join the Bastion and Discord, where you can always ask me about these games. I think that's it for tonight. As last week, I'm going to be continuing the Friday stream as well. This Friday it's going to be a game of Grimlight that I'm going to hopefully run against another human on Tabletop Simulator if I can get it to work. I can get Tabletop Simulator to work fine. It's getting the connection with the other person to work that's going to be the fun bit. I did some Grimlight testing today in the flesh, and it's getting there. I'm happy with the direction the game's going, but it's kind of changing every time I go back to it. It's not like changing loads from the vision I've got in my head, but the sort of written document is changing. So it might appear a bit chaotic if you check the document and then you check it a few weeks later and there's been a lot of changes, because I've got some ideas for it that I want to implement, but it's always changing. In the meantime, thank you everybody for joining me. I will see you on Friday if you decide to join me for the Grimlight stream. We should have the last of the podcasts coming out on Monday. As always, you can find out everything you need to know at bastionland.com, and I'll leave it there. Good night and stay safe.